Last year, Death Battle put out a video of Godzilla vs. Hulk, and it raised some pretty interesting questions about how to make a more modern composite Godzilla. Because before all of the newer stuff, it used to be pretty simple. You just take the atomic breath, the red spiral ray, burning Godzilla, all the different feats and stuff. You can slap them all into one thing because basically every version of Godzilla, with the exception of GMK, was just kind of the same thing. Big giant monster guy. But now we have so much more to Godzilla in the modern day that it raises a lot of questions about the composite Godzilla. How do you fit in Shin, Godzilla Earth? What do you do about the Ultima entity? How exactly do you make a modern composite Godzilla? And I think Death Battle probably did about as good of a job as anyone really could have with this, even if their entire core premise was based more or less off of a fan theory about Singular Point, which we may now never know if that was the actual intention of the anime because it doesn't look like we'll ever get a season 2 of it. Let's dive in with what Death Battle did with their version of a composite Godzilla and talk about how well this was handled and if maybe there was a way to do it a little bit better. So for starters, they bring up his regeneration. They give him various versions of atomic breath, including the red spiral ray and Shin Godzilla's tail blast. And then after that, they kind of just go into Ultima and let Ultima's entity kind of hard carry, which is fair. It's like the single most powerful thing about a Godzilla just in general, especially if you're going with the fan theory about Ultima being responsible for all the Godzillas. Personally, I don't think that theory is worth discussing in this kind of argument. If you were gonna do a composite Godzilla, you might as well just make the biggest version of Godzilla, aka Godzilla Earth, compare and slap the Ultima entity into it, but honestly, that's a different topic. A lot of the stuff with composite Godzilla nowadays is very skewed and very all over the place. I think most people would probably ignore stuff like Shin, stuff like Ultima, and stuff like Earth just because of how outside of normal Godzilla they are. Overall though, I think that Death Battle's version of a composite Godzilla wasn't terrible, but it didn't feel like it really gelled every aspect of Godzilla together because it felt like they were pushing more for the Ultima entity rather than just Godzilla. And given that they did use Earth 616 Hulk, maybe it just would have been better in the long haul for them to take Singular Point Godzilla and just do a fight with that one rather than try to combined all of these Godzillas together. Admittedly, Godzilla Ultima does not have the feats, the sway that just like most versions of Godzilla do, but I guess you could make an argument to scale him to that, especially since we didn't get to see the second version or the second season of Singular Point and whatever they were leading up to with that. A couple abilities they brought up that I wish they would have shown would have been the atomic lasers from the Hanna-Barbera Godzilla, the I-beam ones. They showed off the electromagnetism that Showa had. They talked about Godzilla Earth's shield that could only be bypassed by kaijus that were actually not outside of this or were not part of this dimension. I feel like a couple of those more unique and obscure powers would have made this feel like way more of a interesting composite Godzilla rather than just kind of, let's give him a few more extra laser beams and slap the entity onto him and call it a day. Frankly, like I said, I think this was a fine version of Godzilla composite. I think that there's probably way better versions that they could have pulled from, and there's way better versions I think I've seen people using in the past. So ultimately, good job on this Death Battle. I would give this probably a 4 out of 5 rather than a 5 out of 5 if I was going to give it a kaiju scale. That's going to do it for this one, guys. This was a much shorter one than I was actually aiming for it to be. I had to rework this a couple times, and every time my ideas just didn't seem like they were coming through right. So this is going to be a way shorter one. Next week, however, we will be diving into our ranking of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Archetype of the Super Quantums. If you guys want to see that, then tune in. I can't wait to dive into that one.